Within the unforgiving chambers of the Spanish Inquisition, cruelty often hid behind the illusion of justice. Inside those silent stone walls, countless women became victims of a system that believed suffering could reveal truth. Shackled in darkness, they endured torment that stretched far beyond flesh, pain that bent their bodies, crushed their spirits, and warped the meaning of time itself. And with every echo of a pulley, every snap of rope, one question lingered in the air: what becomes of power when compassion disappears? Let's begin with the first and one of the most infamous methods, the strappado. They nicknamed it the question, although there was never truly a question to answer, only pain, slow, deliberate, engineered pain. The strappado didn't spill blood. It didn't pierce the skin. Instead, it forced the body to confess through silence, shattered by tearing joints. Across Spain, Italy, and Portugal between 1480 and 1834, this device became the Inquisition's favorite persuader. Women accused of heresy, healing, or witchcraft, some barely 17 years old, were bound with their arms wrenched tightly behind their backs. Using a rope and pulley system, inquisitors lifted them until their feet floated above the stone floor. A single drop of just 30 centimeters could dislocate both shoulders. Chroniclers in Toledo described the sound of bones snapping like frozen branches. But what makes this method even darker is the precision behind it. Witnesses wrote that inquisitors rarely raised a woman fast. They lifted her slowly, inch by inch, paused mid-air, and whispered, "Do you repent?" If she fainted, cold water brought her back, just long enough for the lifting to resume. Some sessions lasted over 4 hours, repeated for days. One surviving letter from Seville in 1578 mentions a young healer who confessed only when her arms hung limp and useless at her sides. The irony is chilling. Church decrees officially forbade mutilation. But because the strappado left no visible blood, it was considered merciful. According to Vatican records, more than 12,000 women in Spain alone endured what was called moderate elevation, a gentle phrase hiding one of history's most calculated torments. And yet something remarkable happened. Over time, women learned to weaponize silence. Some bit through their tongues to die before confessing. Others fainted again and again, denying their captors the satisfaction of victory. By the 17th century, its use shifted into hidden chambers, where even official scribes were forbidden entry, and what replaced it would make even practiced torturers look away.
You've probably heard of the rack, the medieval nightmare whispered about in history books, but the Spanish Inquisition didn't invent it. They perfected it. Their version, known as El Potro, earned its grim title because victims screamed like horses being broken. It became a weapon of obedience, crafted for extracting confessions from women accused of witchcraft, false devotion, or sexual betrayal with the devil. The device itself was deceptively simple: a long wooden frame with rollers at each end. A woman's wrists were tied to one side, her ankles to the other. Then, in slow, methodical turns, the inquisitors cranked the rollers, stretching her body inch by inch. Tendons tightened like violin strings, joints strained against their sockets, and with each turn, the line between flesh and bone blurred. A report from Zaragoza in 1574 claims a woman's arms stretched 6 inches longer before she finally passed out. The inquisitors called that moderate tension. The first turn was a warning, the second interrogation, the third, the dreaded confession, perfecta, was the moment the body surrendered before the soul did. What's chilling is how meticulous the record-keeping was. In the Archivo General de Simancas, there are ledgers listing each victim by name, date, and number of turns. Cold, emotionless bureaucratic entries documenting shattered bodies and broken lives. Historians estimate that more than 35,000 women across Spain and its colonies were subjected to the rack between 1500 and 1700. Not all of them died. Many lived, twisted, paralyzed, or unable to walk, declared purified by the very people who destroyed them. And yes, physicians were paid to keep victims alive just long enough to confess. People imagine the rack as wild medieval cruelty, But the truth is far more disturbing. It was bureaucracy made of wood and rope. A machine built not for bloodshed, but for obedience, and when a body could stretch no further. Inquisitors moved to a method that burned from the ground up, pain that crept slowly, inch by inch, until even the strongest will collapse. Here's something most people miss when they talk about the Inquisition. Torture wasn't always designed to kill. Sometimes it was crafted to keep someone alive just long enough to beg for death. That's where foot roasting came in, known as la bota de fuego, or the question by fire. The setup was agonizingly precise. The accused woman was strapped to a wooden bench, her bare feet exposed and coated with lard oil or animal fat. Then, with slow, deliberate timing, her soles were brought near glowing embers or burning coals. The key was control. Burn too quickly, and she would pass out before confessing. Burn too slowly, and the torture would drag on for days. In the tribunal records of Valladolid, inquisitors described timing the roast by the moment the air began to sweeten, with the scent of cooking flesh. A scribe wrote in 1582, "The truth is near." That single sentence reveals everything about the world they lived in. One story speaks of a healer named Beatriz de los Santos, accused of consorting with demons simply because she practiced herbal medicine for childbirth. When she refused to name accomplices, likely imaginary ones, the inquisitors roasted her feet for 4 hours straight. Witnesses say she finally confessed when the bones in her toes turned black. Afterward, her feet were wrapped in cloth so she could heal, just enough to face questioning again. By the 1600s, versions of this method spread across Italy and France. The Bastille even adopted it under the chilling name La chaussure espagnole, the Spanish shoe. They said the pain traveled straight into the soul. But once the flames faded, the Inquisition often turned to another instrument, one that didn't burn skin. It carved through muscle and bone like invisible knives. If you think ropes are harmless, the manquera would have proved otherwise in seconds. This deceptively simple device, thin hemp cords, sometimes dampened beforehand, was engineered to destroy flesh without spilling blood. When twisted, the cords didn't just bind. They sliced downward through skin, muscle, and tendons like a garrote made for limbs. The woman accused, often a healer, midwife, or someone rumored to practice witchcraft, was seated or stretched across a bench. Cords were wrapped tightly around her arms, legs, or thighs. Each turn of the wooden tourniquet increased the pressure. Eyewitnesses said the cords sank so deeply into the flesh that they reached bone without breaking the skin surface. One recorded case from Cuenca in 1575 describes a woman named Maria Lade, accused of preparing a love potion for a nobleman's wife. After she refused to confess, the manquera was applied. Within 20 minutes, her skin split and the fibers tore so deeply that physicians claimed her bones could be traced by the grooves left behind. The cruelty didn't end there. The device followed a rigid rhythm: 3 turns for a warning, 5 for confession, 7 for abstinence. Beyond that, the body often slipped into shock. Survivors rarely recovered. Many couldn't hold a spoon afterward. Their fingers curled inward permanently, nerves severed, hands shaped like claws. And when pain like this failed to break someone, the Inquisition didn't stop. They simply changed tactics. They turned to water. What made the Inquisition so terrifying wasn't just the brutality, it was the creativity. They learned how to make a person drown without killing them repeatedly. This method, known as la tabla or the cloth, became one of the most psychologically devastating tortures ever recorded. The ritual began predictably. The accused woman was tied flat on her back, hands bound, feet restrained, head tilted backward so gravity betrayed her. Then a thin linen cloth was placed tightly over her nose and mouth. Water was poured slowly from a jug, sometimes a cup at a time, sometimes in steady streams. The fabric trapped the liquid, forcing it into her throat and sinuses. She choked, gasped, swallowed, and struggled for air that wasn't there. Records from Toledo in 1628 show inquisitors even counted how many jars of water a woman endured before confessing. 4 jars was considered mild, 10 was severe. Some survived more than 15, and after each session, They revived her, wiped her face clean, and began again. Because technically no blood had been shed. The church called it purification by water. Today, we recognize it by another name, waterboarding. One haunting record mentions a nun named Leonor de Cisneros, accused of teaching forbidden prayers. After her 4th session, she whispered, "I am drowning in God's mercy," before losing consciousness. The inquisitors wrote down those words as a confession. When water no longer broke a prisoner, the Inquisition brought out something colder, devices made of iron, crafted specifically to punish women in ways no man could endure.
The Judas cradle, or culla di Juda, was designed not for execution.
In medieval Europe, punishment was designed not only to hurt the body, but to break the mind. And few devices symbolize that philosophy more than the infamous Judas cradle. Imagine a dim stone chamber lit by sputtering torches. Iron chains clink in the silence. In the center of the room stands a tall wooden frame, supporting a sharp pyramid-shaped seat. But this was no seat of rest, it was a tool of terror. The accused was suspended above the device and slowly lowered toward the tip of the pyramid. No sudden drop, no dramatic moment. The real horror was psychological. The slow descent, inch by inch over long hours, sometimes days. Every moment was a reminder that control belonged entirely to the torturer. Why such a device? Medieval authorities believed in the philosophy of truth through endurance. The slower the method, the more likely they believed the victim would confess, truthfully or otherwise. And so the Judas cradle became not just a device, but a test of human will. Strikingly, the device was built to be reusable. Torturers would polish and clean the pyramid after every session, not out of compassion, but to ensure that justice was carried out with order and precision. Yet what made the Judas cradle uniquely terrifying wasn't just the physical suffering. It was the ritual, the lifting, the waiting, the public silence, the slow descent. Medieval punishment wasn't chaotic, it was calculated. And the cradle was the perfect symbol of that cold surgical cruelty. Today, historians debate how widely it was used, but its impact on medieval imagination was unquestionable. It became a whispered warning, a story parents told their children to dissuade them from disobedience, and a legend that survived through centuries. Even now, replicas displayed in museums unsettle visitors, not because of what they show, but because of what they imply, that cruelty does not need speed or violence. Sometimes, the most terrifying methods are those that wait patiently. In Tudor England, where political suspicion and paranoia ran high, torture devices evolved into tools engineered for control and intimidation. One such invention, deceptively simple yet brutally efficient, was the scavenger's daughter, a device designed not to stretch the body, but to crush it. Created under the reign of King Henry V, this metal contraption folded into a circular shape. Unlike the rack which stretched the accused, the scavenger's daughter compressed the body inward. The victim was forced into a crouching position, knees drawn up, head bent low, arms hugged tight before the device snapped shut around them like a steel cage. But why design a device that crushed rather than pulled? Tudor interrogators believed different body types reacted differently to torture. Those who could tolerate stretching might break under compression. It wasn't about sadism, it was about efficiency. The scavenger's daughter became a specialized weapon in the interrogation toolkit. Most punishments using this device took place in the Tower of London. Prisoners accused of treason, real or imagined, were bound within its iron embrace. The psychological fear of being folded unnaturally was often enough to compel confessions before the device even touched them. And this was precisely its purpose, intimidation with the veneer of procedure. What truly set the scavenger's daughter apart, however, was its portability. Lightweight and collapsible, it could be carried and applied quickly. In an era obsessed with extracting loyalty, mobility meant power. For historians, the significance of this device isn't just in its mechanical cruelty, it is in what it reveals about Tudor society. A world where suspicion equaled guilt, where confessions were valued more than truth, and where engineering was used to enforce obedience. The scavengers. Daughter reminds us that power doesn't always show itself through dramatic violence. Sometimes it reveals itself in quieter ways, in pressure, in silence, in the crushing weight of authority.
This device, known as the rack, was used across Europe to extract confessions, often from those already condemned.
When people think of medieval torture, one device stands above all others as the ultimate symbol of agony. The rack, a massive wooden frame with cranks at both ends, it remains the most iconic and feared tool in the history of punishment. But beyond its grim reputation, the rack reveals a fascinating story about medieval justice, engineering and the psychology of fear. Set in a vaulted chamber of stone and shadow, the rack dominated the room like a throne of dread. Prisoners were laid across its wooden platform, wrists bound at one end and ankles tied to the other. With a slow turn of the crank, the ropes tightened. There was no sudden movement, only gradual tension. The brilliance of the rack, if one can call it that, was its precision. Torturers could control exactly how much strain to apply. They saw themselves not as brutes, but as technicians of truth. Their goal wasn't execution, it was confession. And this slow, mechanical stretching was believed to reveal secrets locked behind silence. Royal courts across Europe used the rack sparingly, not because they were merciful, but because they understood its psychological value. Often, the mere sight of the device was enough to make prisoners abandon their defenses. Chronicles describe interrogations where prisoners confessed before even touching the wood. Despite its fearsome reputation, historians debate how frequently the rack was used. Some argue it was more myth than reality, a deterrent amplified by rumor. Others point to detailed records from England and Continental Europe that document its precise use. Regardless of its historical frequency, the rack became a symbol, a warning. And symbols in any era can be more powerful than weapons. The device represented a world where authority was absolute, where truth could be engineered, and where justice bent not toward fairness but toward fear. Today, replicas in museums provoke a visceral response in modern viewers. It doesn't require graphic detail to understand the terror that such a device once commanded. Its design alone tells a story of a time when human resilience was tested not just physically, but psychologically. Of all ancient torture devices, none blends symbolism, engineering and psychological warfare quite like the brazen bull, a hollow bronze sculpture shaped like a bull, said to have been used in ancient Greece. Its legend begins with Perilos, an Athenian craftsman who proposed a new method of execution to the tyrant Phalaris of Sicily. Perilos designed a life-sized bronze bull with a hidden door on its side and acoustics, engineered to transform cries into bull-like roars. The result wasn't just a method of execution, it was theater. But whether the brazen bull was widely used or primarily symbolic remains debated among historians. The concept alone was powerful enough to become myth. Ancient writers described it as a chilling fusion of artistry and fear. The bull represented authority, power, and dominance. To be placed inside was not only a punishment, it was a statement, a declaration that the condemned were no longer part of the human world. The device's most terrifying aspect wasn't its function, but its intention. It was designed to create spectacle. Audiences would hear the transformed cries echoing from within, believing the bull itself had come alive. Tyrants understood something profound. Fear thrives on performance. Interestingly, the story of the brazen bull ends poetically. According to legend, Phalaris turned on Perilos, testing the device on its own inventor, before using it on enemies, whether true or exaggerated. The tale illustrates how instruments of cruelty often consume those who wield them. Modern scholars remain divided. Some argue it existed as described. Others believe it was an allegory criticizing despotic rulers. Regardless of its historical accuracy, the brazen bull has endured for centuries as a cultural symbol of tyranny and oppression, a reminder of how creativity can be twisted into weapons when power goes unchecked. Today, artistic reconstructions appear in museums and documentaries, inviting audiences to reflect not on violence, but on the psychology of cruelty. The brazen bull stands as a metaphor, a warning about the dangers of innovation without morality.
The Spanish donkey, also known as the wooden horse, was a medieval punishment device designed not for swift torment, but for psychological intimidation and prolonged discomfort. Unlike more sensational tools, its power lay in its simplicity. A long wooden beam shaped like a sharp inverted V elevated on sturdy legs. Victims were placed astride the beam as though riding a horse. But this horse was no noble steed. Its narrow, angular design created a pressure point that made even sitting unbearable. Weights were sometimes added to the victim's feet, not as a form of violence, but to increase the discomfort gradually. This slow escalation of pressure made the device effective as a deterrent. But the Spanish donkey wasn't only a method of punishment, it was also a public demonstration of authority. Many records indicate that it was set up in busy squares where passers-by could see it clearly. Medieval justice relied heavily on public example. The message was simple: disobedience leads to humiliation. Interestingly, the Spanish donkey didn't always appear in the context of torture chambers. It was often used for lesser offenses, sometimes as a disciplinary tool for soldiers or citizens accused of disorder. Its purpose wasn't to inflict extreme harm, but to enforce discipline through discomfort. For historians, the Spanish donkey is fascinating, precisely because it occupies a space between punishment and spectacle. It demonstrates that medieval discipline wasn't always defined by brutality. Sometimes it relied on controlled non-lethal discomfort to maintain social order. One reason the device became iconic is its visual symbolism. The wooden horse appeared deceptively harmless at first glance, but its sharp angle and rigid design hinted at the discomfort it delivered. This mismatch between appearance and purpose made it a particularly effective instrument of psychological fear. In modern museums, replicas of the Spanish donkey stand as reminders of how societies once understood justice. They provoke reflection, not because of graphic detail, but because they reveal how creative human beings can become when designing methods of discipline. At its core, the Spanish donkey represents a world where public shame and discomfort were tools of governance and where order was often maintained not through violence, but through fear of humiliation.